Welcome to the middle of nowhere. No, seriously, imagine a place so remote that the nearest humans to you might not even be on Earth. A spot where the closest land is over 1,600 miles away, and the ocean stretches endlessly in every direction. This isn't some sci-fi movie set or forgotten island. It's real, and it's called Point Nemo. Officially known as the oceanic pole of inaccessibility, this is the loneliest place on our planet. You could scream at the top of your lungs and the sound wouldn't reach another soul for weeks, maybe months. But here's the kicker. Point Nemo isn't just a random dot on a map. It's a place where science, history, and nature collide in ways that'll blow your mind. It's a graveyard for spacecraft, a haven for mysterious sea creatures, and a spot that challenges everything we think we know about isolation. Today, we're diving deep, figuratively and literally, into this watery abyss. We'll uncover why it's called Point Nemo, how it became a cosmic junkyard, what lurks beneath its waves, and why it messes with our heads just thinking about it. From the edge of space to the depths of the ocean, this is a journey to the loneliest spot on Earth. So grab a snack, settle in, and let's explore a place that's as fascinating as it is forgotten. Let's kick things off with the basics. Point Nemo sits at the coordinates 48 degrees, 52.6 minutes south latitude, and 123 degrees, 23.6 minutes west longitude. If that sounds like a mouthful, just picture it as a spot smack dab in the South Pacific Ocean, about halfway between New Zealand and Chile, with nothing but water for miles. Or rather, thousands of miles. It's so far from land that the nearest specks are the Pitcairn Islands to the north, Easter Island to the northeast, and a tiny island off Antarctica to the south. Each one is over 1,600 miles away. To put that into perspective, that's farther than driving from New York City to Denver. Except there's no road, no gas stations, just endless waves. The name Point Nemo comes from a clever mix of science and literature. It was coined in 1992 by a Croatian-Canadian engineer named Hrvoje Lukatela. He used a computer program to calculate the most isolated spot in the world's oceans, and when he found it, he named it after Captain Nemo, the mysterious seafarer from Jules Verne's classic novel 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. In Latin, Nemo means nobody, which fits perfectly. This is a place where nobody lives, nobody visits, and nobody's around. But don't let the literary reference fool you. This isn't some poetic exaggeration. Point Nemo is a real, measurable location, and its isolation is staggering. Here's a wild fact to wrap your head around. If you were standing or floating at Point Nemo, the closest humans to you might not even be on the planet. The International Space Station orbits Earth at about 250 miles above the surface. That's often closer than any ship, plane, or island. Think about that for a second. Astronauts zooming through space could be your nearest neighbors, while every other person on Earth is thousands of miles away. It's a level of solitude that's almost impossible to imagine. But why does this spot exist? Well, it's all about geography and math. Point Nemo is the center of what scientists call an oceanic pole of inaccessibility. A point that's the farthest you can get from any landmass in any direction. The Pacific Ocean is massive, covering nearly half the planet, and Point Nemo is its most extreme expression of emptiness. No continents, no islands, no shipping lanes come close. It's a void in the truest sense, and that's what makes it so special, and a little eerie. Now you might think a place this lonely would be untouched by humans, right? Wrong. Point Nemo has a secret life as a cosmic cemetery. Since the 1970s, space agencies around the world have been using this spot to dump their dead satellites and spacecraft. Why here? Because it's so remote that the risk of debris hitting anything or anyone is basically zero. No ships sail through, no planes fly over, and there's no land to damage. It's the perfect resting place for space junk, and over the decades it's become a watery grave for hundreds of retired machines. Take the Soviet Union's Mir space station, for example. Back in 2001, after 15 years of orbiting Earth, Mir was deliberately crashed into the ocean at Point Nemo. This thing was massive, over 140 tons of metal and tech plunging into the sea. Witnesses said it looked like a meteor shower as fiery chunks streaked across the sky before sinking into the depths. And Mir's not alone. Russia's Progress cargo ships, Japan's HI rockets, even parts of old European Space Agency satellites, they've all met their end here. NASA's been in on it too, though they don't use it as often these days. Experts estimate that between 200 and 300 spacecraft have been sunk at Point Nemo since the space age kicked off. Most of them burn up in the atmosphere on the way down, but the bigger pieces, like fuel tanks or heavy modules, survive the fiery descent and hit the water. Once they're down there, they sink to the ocean floor, which is about 2.5 miles deep at Point Nemo. That's deeper than Mount Everest is tall, by the way. These relics just sit there, scattered across the seabed, untouched and unseen. So what happens to them? Well, the ocean's a harsh place. Over time, saltwater corrodes the metal, and currents might shift the wreckage around. But because Point Nemo is so isolated, no one's really checking. Scientists think the debris field could stretch across hundreds of square miles, creating a kind of underwater junkyard. And here's a crazy thought. Some of these spacecraft carried experiments, tools, even personal items from astronauts. Could there be a guitar from Mir or a science sample from a satellite down there, perfectly preserved in the cold, dark depths? We'll probably never know. This brings up a bigger question. Why do we need a spacecraft graveyard at all? Space agencies can't just let old satellites float around forever. They'd clutter up Earth's orbit, posing risks to new missions, or even crashing unpredictably. Point Nemo solves that problem. It's like the ultimate recycling bin, except nothing's getting recycled, just buried under miles of water. And with space exploration ramping up, this lonely spot's only going to get busier. Let's shift gears and dive beneath the surface. Point Nemo isn't just a dumping ground, it's a gateway to one of the most mysterious ecosystems on Earth. The South Pacific Gyre, where Point Nemo sits, is a massive rotating current that keeps this area isolated even from other parts of the ocean. Nutrients don't flow in easily, so the water's crystal clear but strangely barren at the surface. You won't find big schools of fish or colorful coral reefs here. It's a desert in the sea, quiet and still. But go deeper and things get weird. The ocean floor at Point Nemo is part of the abyssal plain, a flat, dark expanse where sunlight never reaches. Down there, the pressure is crushing, about 1,000 times what we feel at sea level. Temperatures hover just above freezing. It's a brutal environment, yet life finds a way. Scientists have discovered creatures in these depths that look like they belong on another planet. Think translucent fish with glowing lures, jelly-like blobs called salps, and tiny shrimp-like critters that thrive in total darkness. One of the strangest finds? The xenophyophores. These are single-celled organisms, just one cell, but they can grow as big as your hand. They build intricate shells out of minerals and debris, like little underwater architects. Researchers think they might be some of the oldest life forms on Earth, surviving unchanged for millions of years. And because Point Nemo is so cut off, these creatures might be unique to this region, evolved in isolation like the Galapagos of the deep sea. Then there's the noise, or lack of it. In 1997, scientists picked up a bizarre sound near Point Nemo called the bloop. It was one of the loudest underwater noises ever recorded, detected by hydrophones thousands of miles away. For years, people speculated it could be a giant sea monster or some undiscovered leviathan. Turns out, it was probably just an ice shelf breaking apart in Antarctica. But the fact that Point Nemo's silence amplified it enough to spark those theories, that's wild. This place is so quiet that any sound becomes a mystery. And speaking of mysteries, let's rewind a bit and think about how humans even found this place. Long before satellites and computers, Polynesian navigators roamed the Pacific in their outrigger canoes. They were masters of the sea, reading stars and currents like a map. But Point Nemo? It's so far from their routes that it likely stayed off their radar entirely. European explorers like Captain Cook sailed the Pacific too, mapping islands and coasts, but they never came close to this void. It wasn't until modern technology stepped in that we pinned it down. Hroivi-Lukatella's algorithm in 1992 wasn't just a random guess. It crunched data from every coastline on Earth to find the exact spot. That's the power of tech turning the invisible into something real. But let's zoom out for a moment. Way out. Point Nemo's isolation doesn't just echo across the ocean. It's got a strange parallel in space. Think about those astronauts on the International Space Station, the ones who might be closer to you than anyone else if you're at Point Nemo. They're floating in their own kind of void, cut off from the world below. In a way, this lonely spot mirrors the emptiness of space itself. It's no wonder we've tied the two together, using it as a graveyard for machines that once soared above us. Astronauts have even talked about how looking down at Earth from orbit feels both humbling and isolating, kind of like what Point Nemo represents down here. And as we push deeper into space, places like this remind us of the vastness we're trying to conquer. Whether it's the cosmos or the sea,